Hi everyone, and welcome to our short 15-minute video on Unit 701 Strategic Leadership. I'm going to hand over to one of our tutors, James, who's going to take you through the assignment. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Charlotte. Welcome everybody. In this unit, it's the kind of foundational unit for the Level 7 Strategic Leadership syllabus. And we have two kind of main learning outcomes to address. Firstly, to understand the role and context for strategic leadership. There's a lot of emphasis here on the context. And then the second learning outcome is to understand the behaviors and skills for strategic leadership. As we go through this next kind of 10, 15 minutes, I'll try to lay out some of the kind of key ideas to think around in your answers and approaches here. And throughout, we're going to try and practice the kind of three rules, if you like, of answering academic questions. And those would be to make definitions where we see the need to do, to meet the command verb directly, and to use less is more. So we'll try and put those into practice as we go through. And let's get straight into it. So the first question is to critically appraise, that's our command verb here, the impact of organizational context on strategic leadership. Here, then, we might think that an opportunity to make a definition might be in that phrase, strategic leadership. There's a lot going on with that. You might wish to try to make some definition of strategic leadership here, because obviously throughout the whole assignment, we refer to strategic leadership and strategic leader throughout. So I think here's a good opportunity to set the stall out and lay out what you think strategic leadership actually means. You might consider within that, for example, how strategic leadership might differ from other versions of leadership. What makes it strategic within your definition? What we're then going to do is go ahead and look at a critical appraisal. And if we quickly look at our command verb definitions here, it's a systematic process used to identify the strengths and weaknesses of information in order to assess the usefulness or validity. Okay, so we're going to be critical in our thinking here. It's really important to make sure we've got criticality throughout the assignments. And here we're looking at the relationship between organizational context and its impact on strategic leadership in the way that you've defined strategic leadership. So we're now going to go ahead and think about what different organizational contexts might look like. Our biggest wins here, I think, would include size of organization. So, for example, a small 5-person organization is going to have a very, very different context to one which is a multinational 5,000-person, multicultural, multi-country type of organization. So there's an easy kind of difference in context there to tease out. You've got different sector to think about. So there might be some differences you could look at in terms of public sector, private sector, third sector here. You might also think about the maturity of the organization. So models such as the Carnegie Mellon Maturity Index here might be something you could think around. So beyond the size and the sector, we might think around what's the maturity of our organization in terms of its systems, its processes, its approaches to being managed and led. And once you've got a kind of a difference in the context there, then you're in a position to look at the impact those different contexts have on strategic leadership. And to be critical here, you might think around to what extent you think those different contexts really impact on strategic leadership. So, for example, how would a strategic leader in a public sector organization maybe differ from one in a charity? Try and tease out those differences, critically appraise the impact the different contexts might have. Another context you might think around might be around the environment the organization will find itself in. So it could be some external environmental stuff there, pressures upon it, expectations, crises, all that kind of thing. And again, you might make an impact appraisal of how those things can impact on strategic leadership within the organization. So yeah, I think here it would be useful to maybe separate context out into maybe 3 different particular specific types of contexts, and then have a look at, in your view, a critical appraisal of that context and its impact on strategic leadership. 1.2, then we're asked to critically appraise the role of the strategic leader to set and realize organizational goals. So again, here I'd advise you might want to break this down into component parts. Definitions wise, you've already kind of defined strategic leadership. So by inference, that's what a strategic leader does. If you wanted to do, you might illustrate your points with some specific types of organizational goal. What might they be? And then you can work backwards a little bit to, okay, well, given those type of goals, what's the role of the strategic leader in setting those goals and to realize them as well? It's both set and realize. So we're going to think about development and execution of those goals. Again, depending on your definitions, how you want to interpret this, you could wrap goals up actually in terms of the whole organization's purpose, its vision, its strategy, strategic posture, its culture and values. So we're looking at strategic leaders setting the kind of the big stuff, the highest hierarchy stuff here. It's kind of what's your appraisal critically of how you think strategic leaders should set and realize those type of goals, what their role is. And I think it will be very useful again just to make sure you have separated both set and realize, develop and execute here as part of your critical appraisal. If we go further down then to the second learning outcome, we're now going to work to understand the behaviors and skills for strategic leadership. What do strategic leaders, having looked at the context and look at some of their roles and their impacts on organizations, we then take a look at, okay, what would they need to understand and be able to do? And so in 2.1, we're going to critically appraise the leadership behaviors and skills required to deliver strategic goals. Again, you might want to, for clarity's purpose, again, set your stall out to what do we mean by a strategic goal, although you've already kind of covered potentially organizational goals in 1.2, whether they're different or the same is up to you. What we're trying to achieve here is, and again, I'd probably separate this into two different sections. Behaviors and skills are interrelated, but they're separate. They're quite the same thing. So you might want to think about, first of all, looking at a paragraph around leadership behaviors required to deliver strategic goals, and then skills separately, perhaps as well, just to make sure you've got a clear differentiation between the two things. I think it's important here to recognize that there are some big, broad principle things here. If you look at the indicative content, talks about acts with integrity, accountability, builds trust and rapport. To form a critical appraisal, you might want to dig in a little bit to, okay, well, how do we do those things? How important are they? Maybe what happens if we don't have those? What might be the impact on delivering strategic goals if we don't do those things too? So to try to really, really dig into those behaviors and skills a little bit deeper and think about the consequences if they're present or not. What do you think the biggest ones are, the most important things to have might be, depending on the goals that we might be trying to achieve. So yeah, I think that consequential thing of what happens if we don't behave in certain ways or if we don't have certain skills would be useful here for your critical appraisal. And again, there are plenty of things in there that indicative content that might help us. As again, it's always useful to bring at least one accepted model or theory to each answer, especially when you've been asked to be critical, so that it elevates your work above an opinion piece into something that's being kind of balanced and thought through with the current research or modeling available. We then move on to 2.2 and critically reflect on how the principles of strategic leadership can be applied to respond to complex organizational challenges. So again, with our definitions and setting our stall out thing to begin with, personally, I might approach this by identifying what might be the type of complex organizational challenges we might come across as a strategic leader. And in the indicative content, it helps by suggesting that we might think about both internal complex challenges and external complex challenges too. So for this, again, maybe SWOT analyses and pest analyses might help to just tease those elements out a little bit for you. I think that maybe a selection of a couple of specific types of complex internal and a couple of complex external type challenges might be helpful here. And once you've got the kind of context there around the kind of type of challenges that might be complex, then we can start to reverse engineer again and think about, okay, well, what kind of leadership principles might be applied to respond effectively to those type of challenges? So you might think about agility, adaptability, trust building, communication, stakeholder engagement. And then you're going to try and also bring in here, again, some accepted models and theories around leadership practice, principles of strategic leadership here, as you can see on the page. Doesn't matter what you choose. You don't have to be anything on this list even, but you might want to think around just bringing in some kind of ideas here that you can then critically deal with and apply. It also mentions some ideas of change management theory here as well. You might consider that as entirely relevant when you're thinking around responding to complex challenges that tend to induce change or put change pressure on us. So you might think around how street leaders respond to change theory and apply that really well. And also the kind of decision making and problem solving techniques you might bring in here as well. Complex organization challenges may fall in the wicked category. So you might think around how wicked problems could be addressed that might be different from a more kind of tame type problem. You might even think here around your role as a strategic leader in trying to garner the collective intelligence of a team or an organization around challenges. So it's not just you or a small cabal of people. Actually, we're trying to have the whole organizational approach to identifying the challenges in the first place, perhaps, and then effectively trying to respond to them. So overall, the big thing here is to make sure you've applied the criticality throughout this assignment as you go through every question. Just on 2.2 though as well, you'll note that the command verbs changed a little bit. It's critically reflect. So here it's really important that you have brought in some personalized experience, some lived experience, that you've got that kind of real deep and meaningful, when you've dealt with these kind of challenges or seen them in the past, what have you noticed? What have been the approaches that have worked and not worked? So it's really important to make sure you've got that reflective piece in that final question because the command verbs changed a little bit in that final question. Other than that, quite an interesting assignment, I think, to deal with. Quite contemporary if you want to make it kind of up to date with the challenges of AI and technology and the pace of change we often talk about. And this is your chance to kind of pick that apart a little bit. And yeah, 701.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, James. If you do have any other questions and we can help in any other way, please drop us an email at cmi@inpd.co.uk. And we look forward to receiving your assignments soon. Thanks very much.